Family Arts Show, a program where we address the art and science of being a successful, God-fearing black man. Stay tuned. And our question of the day is...
Alright, so my question is, actually, let me give you a little backstory. I grew up in a black home in a very predominantly black neighborhood. So when I went off to school to further my education, I was exposed to a lot of different other races. Within that, I started dating different races than I was normally accustomed to, that being sisters or black women. When I went home and brought this mentality that, there's beauty in every shade, it wasn't taken too lightly. It was more seen as like, a sellout or one of those, quote unquote, those guys that, get an education and up and leave for any other type of girl, any race. And when that really wasn't the fact. So my question is, do you think there are any, first of all, problems dating outside the race? And do you think that it can play any significant detrimental, can it have any significant detrimental effects on, just a person of color?
I wanted to start off with a text in the Bible that I think addresses the points that you brought up, which are very important. And it comes from Acts chapter 17. And let me just ask the Lord to be with us. Lord, be with us as we discuss this, and give us wisdom and understanding, and speak to us through your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Acts chapter 17, it says, in verse 24, it says, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is the Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and has made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if happily they might feel after him, and find him, though he be not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. So there's some few points that we can get from this that speak to interracial marriage and whether it's unbiblical or not. So let me just first start off say that it is not, as far as I can tell from the scriptures, and you have to do your own study, but I don't see it as unbiblical. But let's talk about it from another perspective. Interracial marriage or dating. Let's talk about it from another perspective. And first we get from the Bible that God is love, and we are all equal in his sight. And that God is not a respecter of persons, whether you have a lot of money or you have a little bit of money, whether you're white or you're Jewish or you're Asian or you're African or you're Hispanic. God's not a respecter of persons. He's not concerned about that. He's more concerned about your heart. And God, just like he could have made all the plants of one kind and all the flowers of one hue, he likes variety, and we can see that evident everywhere you look in nature, because that's another book of God that explains who God is, his nature. So we also know as well that he says that Christ said when he was here, we should love our neighbors as ourselves. And so, of course, if you have to love your neighbor as yourself, you must evidently love yourself. So, what does it say though if we date outside of our race exclusively? Well, it doesn't suggest something good about us loving ourselves, and I'll tell you why, actually. So in the 1950s, I believe it was, the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People did a studies in the United States on African Americans and trying to ferret out what were the issues pertaining to the effects that discrimination and segregation had on Americans of African descent in the United States. And they did this very unique study. That was, they took little African American boys and girls, and they would put down before a girl, a little African American girl, a white doll and a black doll, and everything would be the same with the exception of their color and those unique features that are unique to both races. And when they would ask the African American girl, which one is the prettier, which one is more smart, which one is more intelligent, which one would you rather to be your friend, she would point again and again,
which doll is the bad doll?
More likely than not, unfortunately, to the white doll. When they would ask which one is a dumb doll, which one is a stupid doll, which one is an ugly doll, which one is the one you wouldn't want to be your friend, and
which doll is the ugly doll?
Most times out of 10 she would pick the black doll. And so what the psychologists who were doing this research found was that there was this self-hatred. And they did this study again in the 1990s, and they found out the same thing was true. And what the psychologists discovered was, the issue was that when you're brought up in a world, or in a country specifically, where you are not the dominant power, and so that when you turn on the television, the images of power and strength and money and wealth do not look like you. And the images of crime and poverty and stupidity and things you wouldn't like to associate with positive things are associated with you or people who look like you, then it has an effect on your respect for yourself, your appreciation for yourself, and for those who are like you and look like you. Now that's a major, major issue. And we can't address all of those points here today, but it does affect us when it comes to interracial dating, because so many of us men don't love ourselves, and we're not even aware that we don't. So as a result, sometimes we speak about our sisters who look like us in a derogatory term, and as a result, sometimes we think that anything that we do is not going to turn out well. And we may not be conscious of this, this may be subconscious, but it's an issue that we have to address, because if we want to get to heaven, we must have an appreciation for what God has done in us, in every people. David says it like this in the Bible, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So he had an appreciation for what God had done in making him. He liked himself. He didn't think he was perfect. He knew he needed to come to God for help, for salvation, to be a better person, to be a better man. But he appreciated that God made him, and we also know that Christ sacrificed for us, so we can't be of little value. I'm not saying that's your issue, but it's important that I do say that. So I wanted to bring that up. So that speaks to those people, those men, and we all know men like that who date exclusively outside of their race. That says something about what they think of themselves. Now there's another study I want to bring up as well too, that was done by A.A. Brill. That's one of Freud's students. You know, they call Freud the father of psychology. Some may or may not agree about that, but definitely he did a lot of work in that area. And A.A. Brill was one of his students. And he did a study, and he found out that in the South, and this was done in the 1920s, I believe, or early 1900s, he found out in the South that a lot of the gentry, and even before the 1900s, the late 1800s, a lot of the gentry would marry a white woman of the same social economic class, but then would have a mistress on the side who was indefinitely, always without fail, black. They couldn't understand why that was, because they thought that was very unusual from an anthropology perspective. And what they found out was something very interesting, was that a lot of their mothers, who obviously were white, didn't want to wean their children, didn't want to feed their children via their own breasts. So they would have a wet nurse and a nanny. And that wet nurse would breastfeed their child. And especially even before slavery and after slavery, who was their wet nurse? Well, of course, it was a slave, and after slavery, it was still a black woman who was still able to nurse. So she would nurse the child and, of course, give the nutrients that was necessary for the child to develop mentally, which you know is really important to be breastfed. So, as a result, the person that was nurturing them, the one that from their infant's mind was their mother, was a black woman. So what does that tell us? And what did we learn? Something that's very important. What did psychologists learn? Is that you get your sense of beauty from your mother as men. And then women get their sense of handsomeness from their fathers. So they also found that there is a link between your satisfaction with your mate or your partner when they look like your mother. I'm not saying that, we're not talking about any Oedipus issue here where you're dealing with, where you want someone that looks exactly like your mother, but we're saying the same color, that you get a sense of the bone structure, all those things you find to be attractive to you. So that's really important for you to realize if you're talking about long-term happiness. Now, someone looks like your mother, but they're mean as the son of a gun. It doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, you're still not going to be happy because she's mean. But all things being equal, if she looks like your mother, as far as your race, her hair, and so forth, it speaks well to you, and it's nurturing, and you get that same sense of nurturing that you would as a child, in a sense, that same feeling of feeling satisfied. Okay, so that's really important. So the question is, do we love our mother? Do we love our sisters? I mean, obviously the answer to that is yes, of course we do, and we respect them a great deal. How could we if we're Christian men? But so it's not really natural for you to prefer your own mother, but what we do find is a lot of curiosity. And for some of us, I want to mention as well too, it's simply a way of God opening up to us. What your experience is a way of God opening up to us other races. Some of us have had very negative experiences with other races, particularly the Caucasian race, and we have found an enormous amount of prejudice and racism. So much so that some of us look towards them in a very negative light. And sometimes I believe God allows through our experiences to open up our minds and say, look, everybody's not evil. There are dorky people in the black race. There are evil people, sexy people, nerdy people, smart people, intelligent people, foolish people in all races. And God has to reveal that to us. Because when we get to heaven, there's not going to be a situation where we're like, well, we don't go near white people. We stay over in the white section. And you stay over in the black section. You stay over in the Asian section. We will all be brothers and sisters in Christ, even if we look different in heaven. So it's a good thing, and it's not a bad thing for us to think well of everyone, but everyone has a choice whether to be good or bad, to be smart or dumb, or whether to be educated or not, generally speaking, don't they? So that is an experience, and I think that you should consider it in that way. That's what I suggest. I had a similar experience, and it was very helpful for me to open my mind to other people to realize, look, everybody is not out to get me, and even though 90% of those people that I dealt with who were of a particular race were unkind to me, that doesn't mean everyone is like that. Everybody has a choice on whether they're going to be, how they're going to behave towards other people. So that's important. And that's important that we appreciate ourselves and appreciate others. And of course, you know that there is a difference, that after that uniqueness and that taboo-ness goes away and that difference goes away, then we also notice some other differences. Though we notice the differences as far as looks, and that's important for us as men. And I don't have the time to go into that, but I'll talk about it hopefully another time. The differences that make sometimes a difference when we become very familiar. So we know that there's no prejudice in heaven, but there's another text that I want to give you very briefly that's really important as well, and that's in Genesis chapter 24, verses 1 and 10, 1 through 10. Genesis chapter 24, verses 1 through 10, and I think this is really important. And Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house that ruled over all that he had, Put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh. That's how they used to swear back in those days. Instead of you put it on your chest, you put it under somebody's thigh and say, I swear that this is the case. And I will make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. But thou shalt go into my country and to my kindred, and take a wife there for my son Isaac. And the servant said unto him, Peradventure the woman will not be willing to follow me unto this land. Must I needs bring thy son again unto the land from whence thou camest? And Abraham said unto him, Beware thou that thou bring not my son thither again. The Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house, and from the land of my kindred, and which spake unto me, and that sware unto me, saying, Unto thy seed will I give this land, he shall send his angel before thee, and thou shalt take a wife unto my son from thence. And if the woman will not be willing to follow thee, then thou shalt be clear from this thy oath. Only bring not my son thither again. And the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master, and sware to him concerning that matter. And the servant took 10 camels of the camels of his master, and departed, for all the goods of his master were in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, unto the city of Nahor. Now, what's significant about this? First of all, I want to bring, before I forget, about the angel. That's really important. He was saying he was depending on God to help find a mate for his son, the son of promise. And he was depending on God for that. And that's really important, that as men, that we don't just look for our eyes and follow after our lusts and our appetite, but we find a woman who God approves of. And God doesn't approve of every person as our mate, and we know that, but I don't have the time to go into that right now. So let's ask some questions. Were Canaanite women ugly? Well, I can guarantee you that they weren't ugly, that they were really attractive. How do I know that? Because a lot of them were of my hue, and I know that those women are really beautiful, and so do you. Was Abraham a racist? We know he wasn't a racist, and we can give you proof of that, but it's not. I don't have the time now. Were Canaanite women, did they have the same customs as Abraham's family? Well, we can say for sure that they weren't, and we could also say that they probably didn't have the same attitudes towards marriage. They may not have the same attitude towards female roles in the household, towards God and religion, towards rearing children, towards the in-laws, towards the authority of the husband in the home. Those may not have all been the same pertaining to that. So what can we learn for that? We can learn that sometimes we take for granted our own cultural and domestic cultures and subcultures in our own households. The way that your father deals with your mother, the way that things are expected in your community, in your ethnic group. Those are all very unique things, and we grow up with them subconsciously, just like we grow up with what our sense of beauty is, and we don't really realize the differences, and many times we find ourselves very dissatisfied. And although time doesn't permit, I will tell you that there are many a man who married somebody outside of their cultural and ethnic group and found out that they didn't agree with the way that they ran their homes. And so there was a great disagreement, and as a result, a man found himself very unsatisfied because he expected that he would work very hard and provide for everything for his family and his wife, and she would take care of some other duties, and she wasn't doing it. And he didn't think it would bother him, but he got married and found out later that it did bother him a great deal. So that's something not to neglect and take for granted. So let's talk about another issue, and you asked me, are there any problems? So that's one of the things I talked about, the cultural differences. That is a major issue, and you shouldn't neglect it. Another issue is racism. Come on, let's just be honest. We're all black men here, and we all know that racism exists in the world, despite of Barack Obama being the president. We know that it hasn't changed things to that extent, and so we feel that racism, and we're aware of it where we grow up, and as a result of growing up with racism, you know how to recognize it almost immediately, because sometimes it can be a life or death issue. You go into the wrong place and you're not supposed to be there. You can get beat up. Some bad things can happen to you. So you want to make sure that you know how to recognize it, right? You know, you might be being swindled by somebody who looks like they don't think that highly of you, and you go into there to get business or to get counseling or whatever this issue is. Obviously, someone of another race, particularly of the white race, who's not grown up with that, and they haven't learned to develop that skill. Just like if you have an abusive father at home, and you're used to being able to recognize his facial expressions, because if he's angry and you miss it, he might beat you. But if you grew up in a peaceful home, you may not be that good at recognizing facial expressions. Same issue is here. So as a result, when you're complaining to your spouse about, or your girlfriend, about your job or racism with the police officer or with a teacher or a professor or a neighbor, she may not be that inclined to believe you. And that may mean that she thinks you're a liar. It just means that she's not able to recognize it as well, and she might have doubt, which would be natural for her to have. And that can set a big gap in between you and her. And particularly when you're talking about you're trying to excel in your career, competing with other men for promotions, other women for promotions, other things of that nature, you need someone who's going to be able to walk the journey of life with you and to be able to sympathize and empathize with you. And that's a major problem. So that's something that you want to deal with. And this is important because, of course, you face racism in everyday issue when buying a home. in buying a car, in getting a hotel. I mean, all kinds of, who knows whenever you'll find it. And particularly since you're going to school, educating yourself, I'm assuming you're going to be making a lot more money than many other people, black people you know, and as a result it puts you in a place where there are very less black people, and as a result the chances of you suffering racism increases and doesn't decrease, right? So that's something for you to remember, unless you go out of your way to avoid that. So compatibility is a serious problem, and you need to think about that, and racism is a serious problem. So you have to consider as well, you might say, well, I've seen interracial couples and they look so happy. Well, you don't see them at home when they're arguing, and no one sees any couple at home when they're arguing, do they? Unless you're their neighbor and the walls are thin. And you don't see them at family events when some families don't want to be there. You haven't seen them at their wedding and noticed that some people weren't attending or were attending, and you haven't seen how they get along with their family relations, how they get along with their in-laws, how they get along with their friends and co-workers when they find out that they're intermarried. And some of this may be an issue, some of them may not be an issue for you. It may not matter to you, but it's something that you need to consider. And you need to also be considerate about the children that you would have, and them having to decide. We all know people like that who have to decide what race they're going to be, whether they're black or whether they're white. And this, depending on where you live, is an issue and not as much of an issue, but it's up to you, and it's something for you to at least consider. So I have to mention it. So, and you don't see how they feel when they go into certain places and they get looks and so on and so forth. So that's something for you to consider. So finally, dating is not dating, and we all know that dating is finding a partner, a life partner, someone who can go along with you, who'll go with you. And how can two walk together unless they agree? So finding someone who can be a partner with you, who believes in you, who you believe in, who you can be on the same page with, and whom God is pleased with, and hopefully God is pleased with you as well too, makes a big difference. So these are some of the significant detrimental effects that I wanted to talk to you about in answer to your question. And these are some of the problems that I see, and some of them I've experienced in the past as well myself. But as I said, I don't believe interracial marriage is unbiblical in that way. I think you have to make a very considerate decision. And I also think that depending on where you were brought up in, just as there are different class of Asians or white folks, there's different class of black folks. So there are, what you can find in one race, you can find in another race. So some of the qualities that you like in this lady, you can find in another black lady. So you shouldn't feel like this is the only person you can find who is like that. Although those traits that are to be sought after are to be sought after for a reason, because there are not that many people who are of high caliber. So you have to be discriminating, don't you, as far as finding a good spouse and waiting to find one and being prayerful about it. So I want to encourage you in that. I know that it's a challenging thing, but I would encourage you to think about it in a positive way and in a positive light, and to be positive about it. So that's my show for today, and I just want to leave you with this final word, which comes from 1 Corinthians 16, verse 3 through 13 through 15. Finally, I beseech you, brethren, watch ye, stand fast in the faith. Let all you do be done with love. Be manly, quick you like men. Be strong. God bless you.